You are listening to the Emtech Group podcast series, your source for trends about automated QA testing for the insurance industry.
Welcome to another podcast in the Emtech podcast series. My name is Rob Secantine. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Emtech. And joining me today is Don Pegg. I'm really thrilled to have Don on the podcast today, and it's going to be an awfully interesting topic. We're going to get into discussing PDF validation. But before I do any of that, let's have Don introduce himself. And Don, it's great to talk to you again. Please tell us, for our listeners, just a bit about your background, which extensive as it is, and then we can get into the discussion.
Sure, Rob. Thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, I'm Don Pegg. I am currently an independent consultant. Before that, I've worked in Fortune 500 companies in wealth management, P&C world, the life world. Most recently, was CIO of a division of a Fortune 250 company for a life insurance division, and then for a mid-sized mutual company out here in the Northeast as well. So basically done it all, Rob. I've started at the help desk way back when and worked my way all the way up. So I've seen more than I ever wanted to see in life.
Well, you know what? That experience is exactly what helps in terms of the thought leadership that we're really trying to express on these podcasts. And so this will be a really interesting topic because I'm pretty confident it's one that most carriers, really kind of struggle with dealing with, and that is the validation of PDFs, because at the end of the day, that's the document that binds the carrier to the customer. And, why don't you tell us a little bit about maybe the history of how that evolved first, and then we'll get into things like how do you go about validating PDFs and why is it so critical?
I mean, obviously, the PDF is the doc, is specifically in life insurance. Let's stick with that, right? Because that's a lifetime document. That's why those things are so freaking critical, right? You write it and you own it. Period. End of story. And the PDFs, obviously, way back in the day, like when I was walking around with dinosaurs, and there were mainframes around. You did the prints, and it was all sorts of carbon copies and just insert names here. And so you had all that. And that, was obviously back then you had raters, you had all these people. And as efficiencies came around, it became, hey, let's use the systems, and developed a few of those to do the print and the output and everything else. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's everything you expect. And that's where, Adobe came up with the PDF concept and all the way through. So then suddenly now we're able to, without other eyes double checking every document that we send out, because the human being's not looking at it, we're now generating these documents. We create a template and we move forward, and we're able to shoot out 1,000 policies with all the writers and everything else in an hour or numbers like that. And you go through that, and of course now you've written all that business and that's all gone out. And the lovely part of PDFs is it's got twofold in the life insurance world specifically. One, they're all filed. Your writers are filed, your contracts are filed, everything is filed with state regulators. So, anything that deviates from that is obviously a penalty associated with the state agencies or the compact states. Typically all go through that, and but you still have multiple versions of a PDF out there. So you go out and you're happily generating these things, and then you have an error in it, and suddenly somebody calls the state regulators and they didn't like their contract, and now all of a sudden the state gets the contract and say, hey, wait a second, that and isn't where it belongs in the footnote that nobody can read anyway, unless you got a magnifying glass. And now all of a sudden the state wants to go after you and take a look at everything you've ever done because they've got a complaint, and now they have another reason to go look at you. So that's one of the reasons the PDF generation and being able to compare PDFs is, in my opinion, critical. But when you go further than that, Rob, now you've written something, right? And how many writers are on a policy? I mean, each state has its own writer. Everybody's got writers. Now did all the writers print correctly? You know, you got to ask yourself those questions. And if you
And
didn't, guess what?
how do you go about even proofing that? How do you? I mean, it's an incredibly arduous task. It sounds like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have a human being. If human being takes the old contract, we do it the daylight test, put it up against the sunlight, say, okay, yeah, yep, everything looks like it lines up. Put it back down again, move on to the next one. Yep, it all looks like it. You know, now you've got 20 people going through tens of thousands of
Oh my
policy
gosh.
pages and riders and everything else. And so, yes, extremely labor intensive, but the risk associated with those errors can be monumental.
So would it be safe to assume though that carriers may not proof everything?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's called the risk test, right? And unfortunately, you sit there and say, okay, well, this looks like it only impacts, I'll say, state of Rhode Island, right? So we're only going to test Rhode Island. Maybe we'll test a couple of other states on the side. We think it only does this. So you just check those out, and then you find out, well, guess what? That code that was there is now actually going through, and Texas now all of a sudden is getting your new numbers or your new verbiage coming through because you didn't realize there was an if-then loop that Texas was included, unfortunately, by some coding error in the past or deliberate because that old writer was a one-off that you've just modified or inserted.
So let's talk about the financial then impact to a carrier in particular if it gets to a regulatory situation where the regulators are coming in. And I mean, the financial impact is probably multifaceted, right? I mean, you got the
Yeah.
penalties potentially, but what about the labor cost involved in meeting the regulatory needs?
Well, I think
the
there are two
Go ahead.
sets there, right? Your first set is the regulatory costs. So you're going to have fines. You have to meet with regulators. You've got to go and get all the research done. They're going to want to know how this happened, why it happened. They're going to want to make sure that you weren't trying to be sneaky in any type of way associated with that, right? So then you're going to spend the research itself on, if they have enough complaints, will be hundreds of hours of labor, right? It's usually more than one person going out and doing the research. You're pulling out in the QA department, you're pulling in the IT department, you're pulling in all these people. So now all of a sudden you have a massive disruption within your organization. So it's more than just, there's the dollar values, right? You're going to get fined or you are on the hook for a policy does not include military service. Is always one of those exceptions, right? Well, the knot's not there anymore. So guess what? You're covering military service,
Oh man.
right? So now all of a sudden, and that's what I call the. And I was talking to a friend of mine literally about this a couple of days ago, and he called it the set it and forget it and write it and regret it scenario, right?
Well, okay, so if you are a CIO of a carrier, do you budget annually for this kind of exposure? Just as I know I'm going to get a gotcha at some point, so I'm going to have to budget for this.
Well, you kind of throw that in certain, you can't really put a line item in there saying, hey, this is where I'm going to screw up. I'm expecting to do $2 million worth of screw ups, right? But what happens if you put that in there, people are going to sit there and look at you as a CIO and say, what, you're not competent? You're already budgeting.
So you don't budget for it, but you have to apply for it, if you will.
Yeah. So ultimately, as a CIO, your responsibilities are with IT, but your also responsibilities are now overall profitability, right? So while a fine or something may not come out of the quote unquote call it IT budget, right? Fine's going to come out of a regulatory budget or whatever, however the carrier wants to work it. It's still affecting profitability. So your numbers may still be there. But now what affects the IT specifically is you've now pulled these resources out to do this research. I'm pretty sure, at least in the companies I've worked for, we finished a release and we're on to the next release. We're on to the next thing, right? Now, suddenly you remove those resources to go out and now figure out what happened. And typically it's going to be the people who work QA on it. It's going to be the people who did the development on it once you start trying to figure out where the problem occurred. And you run down that list, and now you've got delays, you've got overages, or you have realistically what a lot of people forget about is IT people work a lot, and then they work even more, and they get a little more frustrated, and it goes on, and then you get in a rabbit hole. And now you've got endless working conditions, over real late nights, constantly running while you try to meet your deadline, but also try to satisfy the regulators. And that causes quality issues again. So you're in the spin cycle
So
now.
it's a hamster wheel that just keeps
Yeah.
spinning and spinning and spinning. So over the years in your career, I mean, I would imagine that you've looked at different ways to either modify or automate the testing that certainly is, the light test that you talked about before, which is very manual. There must be improvements along the way to testing PDFs.
There really weren't a lot of good methods in the past that were better than the light test. But now, as the industry is evolving and the demand is now out there to do that, you're starting to be able to get to a point where you can have the system. If you've got, I mean, there's some keys here, right? The first key is understanding your systems. If you understand your systems, then you can have templates. And if you understand your templates, you understand where the writers are coming from. And then if that's the case, then all of a sudden you can have a system go out and say, here's the PDF. Here's how everything is lined up on the PDF. Here's what's being, in my template, my source, as I call it.
Right.
And then you have your new PDF that was just generated. Let the system figure it out. And let the system come in and say everything came out okay. And you're able to run.
So these are what? Automated scripts, perhaps? Or,
well, they would have to be they would have to be an automated script of sorts, but you're going to have software that's capable of understanding that script. So you have to have baseline, and then you have to have the software that understands the baseline. What is the baseline? And then you have to make sure your test data aligns with that as well. Otherwise, you've got a different set of problems there.
If I'm a carrier, I'm in the software development business to try to create, testing software. Yeah. Is that something that, as a CIO, you even look forward to doing?
Well, yes, because one of my last gigs in corporate America, as I'll call it, was actually to start developing PDF, part of a automated test suite that looks at the PDF generation, so that we can get to a point where it's not a human being laying eyes on everything, and we went down that path and we started building out something that was really cool. I ended up leaving before that was finished, but I've heard that it is pretty much complete now, and I've seen some of it going, and I think I'm very proud of being on the baseline of that, because the amount of labor that you used to put into finding just the PDFs, or risk it with the regulators, and risk it with the policyholders, right? It was too much. So, where I would have 10 hours of testing, call it, just to make sure the calculations were running right for various states, I'd have 30 to 40 hours of somebody making sure all those writers came out correctly. They're still printed correctly, that everything is still functioning correctly. And that also depends on what was the development, right? If you didn't touch the PDFs, it would be a little less. If you did, you're now going to be a 3 to 4 to 1 ratio to make sure everything printed right.
So if there was a good automation solution for validating PDFs, that would be probably a game changer for many carriers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's going to be a massive cost savings. And as you know, in life insurance, a lot of people want to think it's very profitable, and it can be, but, pennies matter, right? So every hour that you're able to cut out of your QA is either, one, down to your bottom line, but two, in my case, we were able to reinvest that into more efficient systems, better user experience, and going down paths like that. And that was the second thing I was going to mention, Rob, was you have the regulators. And we like to all focus on the regulators. Oh, yeah, the regulators. Oh, yeah, because there's the big dollars there. A lot of the big dollars that we forget about, though, are the phone calls that suddenly come in to the call centers when something's wrong. They're like, what is this? My favorite ones are when, I don't know why I have Sally Mae's, why I'm being called Sally Mae here, when my name is Susan Cortez. So suddenly now you've got all these phone calls flooding in. You may not have a regulator involved, but now your call center is getting flooded, especially if things were being misprinted regularly. Obviously, if there was a name like that, the regulator is probably going to get involved. I mean, you have to at some point report. But
so it really becomes a reputational risk issue.
Yes.
Along with,
absolutely.
of course,
you have
a regulatory issue.
Well, and then what happens on social media? Think about that for a second, Rob. What
Oh
do
boy.
these our satisfied customers do they go out there and say, "Oh, how happy I am"? Well, 1 in 10 might. 6 in 10, 5 in 10 who are not happy are absolutely, especially if you're not didn't satisfy what their problem was, are going to let the world know.
And that's potentially very expensive.
Yes. Well, and especially in life insurance, reputation is everything. Literally, a reputation is everything. If you've got a bad reputation as a carrier, agencies aren't going to want to go to you. People aren't going to want to come right with you because you're going to have a reputation of being, oh my God, they can't get anything right. Are they going to actually pay out this claim? Because I'm going to be dead. I'm not going to know whether it happens. So I have to have, if I'm going to pour money into this policy, I want to have some faith that this company knows what it's doing.
And so at the end of the day, the combination of the regulatory as well as the reputational risks are really immense in terms
Yes.
of actual dollars and real
Yeah.
dollars, lost or spent having to deal with the situation.
Yeah.
So
And
finding a
productivity,
way,
and the productivity, right? You can't forget the productivity. I
ah,
mean,
tell me a little bit more about that.
well, that's where your call center now is now answering a bunch of questions about why am I getting a great one? Why am I getting a second bill?
Oops.
Well, yeah, oops. And now all of a sudden they're not able to answer the questions. Your call wait times are increasing. Customer satisfaction is going down. Now you've called IT, so you may not have a regulator involved, but now IT's got to investigate why did this happen, and you're going through the same scenario again like you would have with a regulator. You've resources that you were trying to use to make the business better, whether that is new product, whether that's more efficiencies, whatever that is, aren't getting that stuff done anymore. I mean, a lot of people
So
just want to focus, like I said, on that one piece, but the pie is so big when it comes to making mistakes, specifically with PDFs,
how
that
do those mistakes, happen? I mean, how does it change from Sally Mae to Susan Cortez, as you pointed out before? How does that end up happening if the data is, input in the first place by, an agent, and
yeah,
it's inputted as Sally Mae, but how does it end up being
I've
Susan
I've
Cortez?
I've seen things where the memory wasn't properly cleared and the cache for the web app servers. I've seen it in a scenario where an address is similar, and suddenly the machine got confused and used the wrong thing. Because you can have somebody in an apartment building was the example, and they just put, I'm going to make it up, 123 Main Street, right? And each one was 123 Main Street, and then it didn't match properly for some reason. Actually, I know the reason, but I'm not going to get into it. And now spits out the wrong stuff. You can have scenarios where floating decimals aren't working right because you just upgraded your servers.
And
Now all
what
of a sudden
happens
things
when
are off.
information is passed from, say, an e-app to underwriting software to a policy admin software to, keep
Well,
going
that's where
down
the
the chain?
XML that comes with XML. That's an XML checker at that point. Those are
And
cool too.
so we need to validate the accuracy of XML data being passed between applications as
Oh,
well then.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. If you're XML, and that's always been a challenge, right? XML is pretty long, pretty complex in many cases, because you have, if it's this state, this field doesn't exist. If it's that state, you have to put that field and that field in, et cetera, et cetera. So that's labor intensive, and that's if you can generate and manage the XML, that will help you with PDF validation, and it's an important part of getting yourself there. But ultimately, you still have to make sure that what is sent out is proper, right? So that's
So
your final
it's
check. That's the
so
port. That's the point with PDF. That is your final check. Is everything working as expected?
Yep. And so it's really a double-edged sword then between the XML data that you're talking about as well as what ends up on the PDF at the very end. And you've got to somehow manage to figure out how to accurately check all of that. And if you can
Yeah,
do it with the XML, that, as you say, may help, but it's not complete and final until a test is done on the PDF itself.
correct. Yeah, I mean,
This
you
is
can
an
make sure the
arduous
numbers.
process.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean, XML, you insert latest greatest concept there, right? If your data transmission between those systems, because they're all different systems, and in many carriers, it's 5 different or 4 different, or in one case, 12 different admin systems, you got to be validating that everything's going properly too.
And from multiple different vendors probably as well.
Oh yeah, no, of course those 12 admin systems were from 12 different vendors.
Well, we can't make anything easy in the carrier space now, can we? If there's a silver bullet out there that enables automated PDF validation, that's a welcome sign, I would guess, in the industry.
Well, yeah, because like I said, if you can get yourself to a point where you trust the system to be able to do that comparison for you, and then you're able to run those permutations properly. Oh, not just properly. You run all the permutations at the beginning, you'll know your systems are working correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, once you get to trust it, you can scale back to know that the system's working as corrected as expected. But you still going out and knowing that you're not printing garbage, because that's what it is. If you're not following the regulations, if you're not putting the right information on the policies, if you're not double billing somebody because the PDF generator decided to do it twice, that's huge, right? That's
Well,
just huge.
it certainly is. And in sort of summary, it's absolutely critical, as you say, to get it right, because once that PDF is out the door, the old expression, you own it, right?
Well, yeah, you write it and regret it. If you're not testing it, you're writing and regretting it, man.
Well, let's take a chance and work together to see if we can develop some ideas that can really help streamline the PDF validation process. Don, this has been excellent, informative, and I look forward to the next topical discussion that we have a chance to discuss. Thanks
All
again.
right, Rob.